Three little dopes on a rope are we, with a groping hand and a wedged-in knee, searching in vain where a hole should be. Three little dopes are we.
What you're about to see are the two earliest films made of climbing in the Washington, D.C. area. This one from 1947, and later a black and white from 1952. The songs you hear were recorded in the 40s and 50s by Herb and Jan Kahn, fixtures in local mountaineering. The films were edited onto videotape in 1987 by Gordon Swenson and narrated by me, Jack Smith. ABC News, where we work, kindly lent us its facilities. The films give a glimpse of a time that has passed us by. You'll hear the voices of some of those who featured in the films, who made them, and who supervised this restoration. They were the first generation of area climbers. Johnny Reed, a student at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, later a geologist. Marion Jackson, one of the strongest female climbers in the group, she began climbing in high school. Pim Karcher, she worked at the Department of Defense and climbed with her husband. Don Hubbard, at the time a chemist at the National Bureau of Standards, a superb and graceful climber. You'll hear his voice. Dolores Alley also worked at the National Bureau of Standards, where the first nylon ropes used in the U.S. were tested in World War II. She had two children, whom she sometimes took climbing. Chris Skoridos, raised in Colorado, studied botany and law and became a businessman, a notoriously powerful climber. This film was meant as a simple demonstration of what climbing was like here in the 1940s. It was shot with equipment borrowed from his employer by John Minahan, who worked in a photo supply house. He was an early organizer of caving in the area. You'll hear his voice as well. And that of Arnold Wexler, who helped direct the two films. Not easy, since they were shot in an old wind-up camera and edited in the camera. Fitzhugh Clark, he helped set up the shots, a civil engineer who climbed and caved. Andy Kaufman also directed the film. He later graduated to the Himalayas and climbed two 8,000-meter peaks there. The caricatures of the climbers for this opening were painted by Tom Culverwell, an artist with the U.S. Forest Service, many of whose maps are still in use. The climbs you'll see may be familiar, but not the techniques. Remember, this was back in the early stages of technical climbing here, right after World War II.
The sites we selected in the Potomac were Juliet's Balcony, which we thought would give us a little bit of exposure.
The voice of Arnold Wexler.
And we thought that it might be nice to show what we were doing locally in the way of climbing. Juliet's Balcony is a very simple, but I think delightful climb. It's something that you can really do with your hands tied behind your back and walk up without a rope. But it was an excellent training climb for beginners, and we love to take beginners out there because we wound up on a little perch from which gave the name to the climb Juliet's Balcony. And when you sat on this perch, your feet dangled over the river, and it was kind of airy and made for something quite nice.
These girls are every bit as good climbers as most of the men.
John Minahan.
Far more graceful, too.
Now, to start the climb, one can rappel from the top of the cliffs down to the bottom of the cliffs, and this is what the climbers are doing in this sequence. Then they tie in. Dolores will do the leading. She takes the first pitch, a gentle slope, easy, and then comes to a comfortable place and brings the second climber up. Notice the hip belay that is being used. That was the sort of thing we stressed in those days. And then follows a little traverse, which brings the climber or the leader to the end of the second pitch. We climbed on a 100-foot rope, which meant that for 3 climbers, the leads were very short.
That's Pim. I recognize her hips.
What kind of shoes were you using back then?
Our shoes were always tennis shoes. Occasionally we would climb in mountaineering boots, but now Dolores is leading out to the balcony. And that's a really airy perch.
The belayer is anchored on pins then?
I regret to say that she is not. This is a hip belay, and the reason she is not is because there was no place to drive in a piton unless we wanted to put in an expansion bolt, which we were not doing very much in those days.
Also, this picture was made prior to belaying the leader, which is the technical film we did. We learned a lot about dynamics in the second film.
And the final pitch takes the climb up to the top of the cliff.
Could you name for us the other 2 climbers with Dolores?
Yeah, the second is Marion Jackson, and the third on the rope is Pim Karcher.
The voice of Don Hubbard.
There's a better variation of that they've never been photographed, but when you're rappelling down, you run back and forth across, and you can swim around towards the river and come out on a little tiny ledge there, and that's the view. And they didn't put that in, but it involves racing back and forth till you got enough momentum to swing around the corner.
When I started singing all these rock climbing songs,